That's 116. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments. We do it, and we do it all with boxing writer, author, CompuBox counter, historian Lee Groves. How you doing, Lee?
Doing well. And you?
Pretty good, and looking forward to our special guest. She'll be on a little bit later on. She is a boxing author and a historian and a public speaker.
Sounds familiar.
Malissa Smith. She's got a great last name. She joins the Smitties, and we're looking forward to that. But before we get to that and some Smitty Sez stuff, where I get to do my best bitching, moaning, and griping, you're going to get us updated as to what's going on in boxing with some results and some previews. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, in honor of our guest, who is a terrific boxing historian as far as the women's game is concerned, let's start with the April 6th card on DAZN. And one of the big fights that was on the card featured Skye Nicholson and Sarah Mahfood in a WBC vacant featherweight title fight. Nicholson won with a near shutout 10-round unanimous decision. Each round pretty much looked the same. Nicholson used her advantages in height and reach, as well as her southpaw stance, to keep Mahfood under control. And during the post-fight interview, she said that she'd be willing to fight the woman who holds the other three belts, and that's Amanda Serrano, in a 12-round, 3 minutes per round bout. But there's one problem with that. Unless WBC President Mauricio Suleiman suddenly changes his mind, Nicholson would have to drop the WBC belt in order to fight Serrano in a 12-by-3 bout. And I don't think Nicholson would want to give up that bargaining chip, and especially since Serrano would probably be favored to win that fight. So we'll see what happens down the road there. And then in the main event, in a fight that was billed as an IBF title eliminator at 140, Richardson Hitchens, the number 3 contender in the IBF, scored a 12-round unanimous decision against the 7th-ranked Gustavo Lemos. Hitchens was favored to win on points going into the bout. I predicted he was going to win a unanimous decision, so the official result wasn't much of a surprise. But what was surprising was that Lemos, who logged only 40 seconds of action in the past 2 years, fought so well that many believe he should have won the fight. But beyond the result, the biggest firestorm was ignited by one of the judges' scorecards, 117-111 for Hitchens, submitted by Tim Cheatham. Now, I had the fight scored 115-113 for Lemos, and I wrote on X the following, quote, "No matter how one saw the Hitchens-Lemos fight, one has to wonder how anyone could come up with a 117-111 scorecard for Hitchens. To me, it was a nip-and-tuck affair. Both men had good moments, but this was not a lopsided fight either way. Accountability, anyone?" Now, Smitty, you and I spoke last week about how bad judging doesn't bring any real public penalties. How did you score the fight, and what are your thoughts on Cheatham's card as well as on the post-fight fallout?
How do you spell his name, Cheatham?
Yeah.
Look, I didn't score the fight. I enjoyed the fight. I watched the fight, and I was over at Wayne McCulloch's house today. The Pocket Rocket, his daughter Winona does my hair. Does a great job. Doesn't my hair look great? Really looks best hair in boxing, by the way. Thank you, YMac. And I was talking to Wayne and his wife Cheryl and his daughter Winona, and we were talking about accountability. Is there any other professional sport where this could go on and on and on and on? And with all the technology that we have today and everything we have today and things like, well, what you work with, CompuBox, and I just don't understand it. Now, that fight could have been 115-113 either way. Could have been a draw.
Yeah.
I had Lemos winning the fight primarily because he did much more of what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
He wanted to cut the ring off. He accentuated. I love, it made me think of my friend, the late, great Angelo Dundee, accentuating the negative. He made his lack of height work for him. It was very Bronx bullish, very Carmen Basilio-esque, Gene Fulmer-esque, coming in and throwing short, hard, powerful shots to the body, to the head, to the arms, to whatever the hell was there. If you go by clean, hard punching, effective aggressiveness, ring generalship, and defense, and then my fifth, which is who was doing more, clearly the Argentinian fighter should have gotten the decision. And I think Hitchens is okay, overhyped. And and anybody could have that kind of performance. He's got skills. Don't know if he has the other stuff. One of the things I don't like is his corner. There was a lot of chaos in there and 27 guys yapping. But I thought they got the decision wrong. But it wasn't one of those where if it was just, a draw or one or a couple of points either way, it would have been a big deal. Cheatham's card, he needs to go back to school if there is one for that, or be reprimanded. But then he's not alone. We see this. And what happens is when there's a bad decision in boxing and when there's a bad performance by a referee, honestly, we all forget about it. 3 or 4, months later, we forget about it. We have to think, now, what was that fight? Who was that referee? What was it? And it goes on, and because nothing happens. The real people that suffer, to me, are the fighters, the ones that get the bad call. But that's my thoughts. I thought the Argentine won.
Yeah, I thought he won as well. I did CompuBox research on Hitchens. I did several of his recent fights. This was not the same guy that I saw on video. He was clearly bothered by the pressure by Lemos. He had good moments. Lemos had more good moments. I had him 7-5 ahead.
And by the way, if he's supposed to fight the winner of the Matias Perro fight, which is going to be Matias, in my opinion, right, as I tweeted the night of, if he's going to take on the Puerto Rican, he's going to need, as they say in Jaws, if you remember that class, he's going to need a bigger damn boat to deal with that guy. So,
yeah, Subriel Matias, he's made his last 5 opponents quit on the stool.
Yeah.
That's how much pressure and power that he brings to every fight. That he makes professional fighters, tough men, quit on their stools rather than to go out and take more.
We got to ask him whether it's Matthias or Matias. I got to get that. I hear so many different. He's such, and I think he might be the best at that weight class. So I got to get his name right.
It's Matias, but
I love him. I love his style, and he's different. But boy, he is special, as you just mentioned.
Well, let's switch subjects to a more positive note. And I give full credit to podcast alum Lance Pugmire for posting this story on Boxing Scene. Last Saturday, the IBF filled its title vacancy at 154 pounds by staging a match between Bakhram Murtazaliev, who has been the #1 contender for the last 4 years without getting a title shot, and 38-year-old German Jack Colquet, a former secondary world titleist. Because Colquet's promotional company, Aegon Sports, won the purse bid, the fight was staged in Colquet's home country of Germany. And that country, and that promotion, not the country, but that company, threw all sorts of roadblocks Murtazaliev's way. First, Murtazaliev, despite being the #1 contender, was given second billing to Colquet on the fight posters. He had to weigh in first. He had to walk into the ring first. Second, Murtazaliev is a devout Muslim, but the promoters still held the bout during the month of Ramadan, which directly affected the way that he could have his meals. As a result, he ended up sleeping all day, training at 10 or 11 at night. He had dinner before he went to bed, and then he basically slept all day. So they messed with his diet. They messed with his circadian rhythm. And third, for 2 weeks, he had to stay in what was described as a low-budget motel in the middle of nowhere that wasn't exactly befitting a world title fight participant. Now, Murtazaliev would have been well within his rights to complain, but according to his promoter, Hall of Famer Kathy Duva, he just put his head down, he went to work, and he did his job. And then there was the fight. It was a really good fight. It wasn't available in the U.S., but it was seen on the Spanish language ESPN Knockout channel. Colquet performed well, and he landed a lot of sharp punches. He left Murtazaliev's face a bit discolored, but in round 11, Murtazaliev unleashed a devastating assault that scored the fight's only official knockdown. Koke arose, but the referee deemed him unfit to continue, and Murtazaliev is a new champion. And when the fight was called, Murtazaliev dropped into a Muslim prayer pose and he gave his thanks. Pugmire quoted Duva as saying the following, quote, "I've been doing this for 45 years and I've never cried in a fight. This is the first time. I was literally emotionally soaked when it happened," end quote. And just like that, Kathy Duva has another world champion. Now, Smitty, you've always said that fighters are the most common and uncommon of athletes. And this certainly proved that, does it not?
Yeah, Murtazaliev approved it with all those obstacles. I think what he did is he used obstacles as an inspiration and went in there, and it sounded like from what you told me that he really dug deep, and so happy for him and Kathy Duva. Those are the kind of stories that we like to see. I still believe, not that we love to see fighters make as much money as they can, but I still believe the hungry fighter, whatever their hunger for, whether it be obviously money or a championship, to do something for their family, the hungry fighter is the fighter that usually is the more successful fighter. And Murtazaliev proved that again, I think.
He really did. It was an inspirational story. I counted the fight for CompuBox, and what an assault in the 11th round. He landed more than 40 punches overall. Koke, he fought well. He fought his heart out, but he just could not stand up under that assault. And now I'm going to move on to the previews, which on Saturday, the card on DAZN is featuring three notable fights. The main event will see Jordan Gill fight a scheduled 12-rounder at super featherweight against Zelfa Barrett in an important domestic fight in the UK. Gill is known as the Thrill, and he was last seen stopping Michael Conlon in Conlon's hometown of Belfast, and he calls himself a half-Indian Golovkin. That's a lot to live up to. And Barrett will be fulfilling a dream by fighting inside Manchester Arena. He has a 30-2 record. The odds makers see Barrett as a slight favorite. It should be a real good one, and I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Who do you like?
I kind of like it's really tough. Barrett is a tough fighter to deal with. I'm going to pick Gill. I haven't done a lot of study on it, but I'm going to pick Gill by decision. The two supporting matches are two important world title fights in the women's game. Again, considering who we have coming up, it's going to be pretty interesting. Undefeated British southpaw Rhiannon Dixon will face veteran Argentine Karen Carabajal for the vacant WBO lightweight title, while IBF super bantamweight champion Ellie Scottney of England will face undefeated WBO super bantamweight champion Ségolène Lefebvre of France in a title unification match. So I'm definitely going to check out that card. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, it is. We're going to take a little our first break, and we will come back. Ben, I know you've been looking forward to having this young lady on the program, Malissa Smith, women's boxing historian, a public speaker, and a couple of books. I know she has had one book out and is getting ready to release another one. Right. We'll come back with a pair of Smiths and a Groves right after this.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back on In This Corner, the podcast, boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, boxing's biggest fights, greatest memories and moments. We do it all, by the way, next week. Tommy Yankello from the World Class Boxing Gym will be with us, along with Regis Prograis, and we'll preview, I guess it's a big fight. It's Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia. Ryan, of course, is out there where the buses don't run, but that's another story. We'll talk about that fight in great detail next week. But right now, and I think this is a perfect time to have this young lady on with what's going on in NCAA women's basketball and Caitlin Clark and Dawn Staley and the whole thing there to talk about women's boxing. Really, I don't think anybody better to do it than another Smith, not this Smith, but Malissa Smith. She is a writer, an author. She is a public speaker, and she is a women's boxing historian. First off, welcome to the program. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, and thank you, Smitty and Lee, for having me on the show. I'm very excited to talk to you both.
Yeah, and I mentioned what's going on in other sports, and it's been a pretty good year and few years for women's boxing. Now, your first book was called the A History in Women's Boxing, which I know it was called the Bible of Women's Boxing by Ring Magazine. And in June, you got another one coming out, The Promise of Women's Boxing, a momentous new era for the sweet science. Before we get into those, I want to know a little bit about up close and personal about Malissa Smith and a little bit about your background and lead us into where you got into the sweet science.
Well, I was a kid growing up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the early 60s, and would always be in awe of the boys who would fight each other and those who had science and those who didn't. And the kids with science had their arms tucked in, never got touched by somebody hitting them. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I want to do that. I want to box. Well, it took me many, many years and lots of fangirl praise for folks like Muhammad Ali and Kenny Norton in that his great era of the heavyweights for me to realize that I could actually do it too. And when I turned 42, I went into Gleason's gym in Brooklyn, New York, and started to learn the sweet science for myself. But I was also alongside a lot of incredible female pioneers like Alicia Ashley, who was just inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame. And I was amazed that they could really fight, and not only fight, but were fighting in professional bouts and going all over the world to do it. So I started to chronicle the stories of women's boxing beginning in 2010. And then in my own personal life, I was interested in furthering my education. So I went back to college and got a master's degree in 2012. And as a thesis, I wrote about boxing. It's called Boundaries in Motion. And I really took a look at what was it about women's boxing that was so hated by so many people. And I really wanted to understand what it was about boxing as a hypermasculine sport and how it really affected people to see women in the ring when they didn't get bothered by kickboxing. They weren't bothered by mixed martial arts, but they were really, really, really disturbed by women boxing. So I tried to tease out what that meaning was. Never quite concluded an answer, but I was able to give some papers academically and was offered an opportunity to write a history of the sport. None existed until I kind of came on the scene, and that was published in 2014. And out of that, I really have been able to involve myself much more in the sport itself, becoming a founding board member on the International Women's Boxing Hall of Fame with Sue Fox, who's done this amazing work with the Women's Archive Boxing Network over the years, really over 25 years, keeping the sport alive and creating a community for amateur and professional women boxers. And then from there, I work with Lee at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. We meet up every summer and figure out who it is that the electors should vote on. And I have the privilege of being on the Ring Magazine's Women's Rating Committee, and we go at it every week, taking a look at the fighters, how we should rank them, which can get pretty contentious. And then I also do the same for the World Boxing Council on a monthly basis, taking a look at the fighters, both who are winning or both who are competing for WC belts, but also making sure that women who are not necessarily competing for the WBC are fairly ranked so they have an opportunity for those belts should they wish to go forward.
Now, and you know, I've been involved in women's boxing for so many years, going back, calling fights of Christy Martin and Layla Ali and Sumaya Nani and Ann Wolfe and The list goes on and on and on. Um, you mentioned, with fighters in general, boxers in general, I call fighters the most common and uncommon of all athletes. And usually, not always, but usually the great fighters have come from the other side of the tracks. It's not so much that way, I don't think, with women's boxing, or is it? Is there some characteristic or characteristics that you have found that draw these women to go into this type of a sport?
I think there are a few things. I mean, yes, there are fighters who, like a fighter like Claressa Shields, who grew up under very challenging, difficult circumstances in Flint, Michigan, which is as a place in the world, is a poverty-stricken area where there's not a lot of opportunity. But there are also fighters like Christy Martin, who, we can legitimately say created modern women's boxing as we know it in 1996 on the Mike Tyson's card when she fought Deidre Gogarty. She grew up in a nice family in West Virginia. She wasn't dirt poor. She wasn't fighting against those kinds of things to become a boxer. It was really more a personal challenge for her. There were other issues that arose, but it wasn't one necessarily of poverty. And the woman she fought, Deidre Gogarty, she came from a lovely family of dentists in Ireland, So it doesn't necessarily track per se. What I will say that I find is that women who box, and you can still call women who are boxing today trailblazers in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
They have a real purposeful sense of self. They have a real purposeful sense of their own desire to do their best physically and to really test themselves for their own personal development. They have a lot of motivation for that. But I will also say, no matter what the class that woman came from, whether she came from a rich family or a poor family or somewhere in between, many women have had to overcome issues of assault, of sexual violence, or other kinds of physical problems that have occurred to them over their lifetimes. In my case, I grew up in an era when women weren't encouraged to do sports at all. I grew up in New York City. I mean, sports for us was punch bowl, and nuke 'em. We didn't have sports. Maybe you'd swim if you had a pool in your school. But I also was sexually assaulted. It took me a long time for me to learn my own sense of physical presence. And in part, that healing occurred on a boxing bag. So you will find a fighter like Heather Hardy will talk about that aspect of her life and how it motivated her to become a boxer and to really be able to grow strong in her own physical presence. So I think there's a lot of other dimension to the motivations of female fighters, but among all of them, it is a tremendous desire to test their abilities. It's not so much fighting another fighter as sort of like an old-fashioned mano a mano, a woman-o a woman-o. It really has to do with the challenge of boxing itself and of making their presence felt in a sport that often really works actively against them.
We're chatting with Malissa Smith, as she is a women's boxing historian and author, as I flip to another historian and author named Lee Groves.
Malissa, when we last talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, you told me that women's boxing is your passion. Okay. Passions are usually ignited by a singular event or maybe a singular person. Was that the case with you in women's boxing?
I don't know that it's a singular event per se, but I will say it was my experience in the gym itself. I used to work out every 3-4 mornings a week. 7:00 I'd get to the gym, so I'd work out before I went to work. And I used to watch Heather Hardy come into the gym and train starting 6:37, 7:30. Usually she would come in a little after me to start her training. On days when she had a fight, she would come in at 6:30, because that was camp. She didn't have the opportunity that men have who are champions or fighting at that caliber to go away for 6-8 weeks in some nice little country place and sit in their little place and work out in the morning and have a little nap and get a massage and eat all this wonderful food and then go back into the gym. Her camp was coming in an hour early and hoping that getting her daughter settled and ready to go to school an hour early, or maybe having her daughter sit in the gym with her before she ran out to take her to school, have her clients, and then work another 2 or 3 extra hours of boxing training, leg work, conditioning, running over the bridge and back. And that's camp. And that impressed me. And she wasn't the only person doing that. It was Veronica Jeffries was doing that. Melissa St. V was doing that. Alicia Napoleon was doing that. They weren't in camp. Camp is the extra hours you add into a day. And when I saw that and I saw that passion, I realized these are stories that have to be told. And as a writer coming into myself in that sense, those were the stories I wanted to amplify.
You know, I've seen, when doing research for CompuBox, I would, whenever I do the female fighters, there's a common link, and you brought that out with Heather Hardy. There's so many women fighters that more often than not, they have to make do with what they have. They don't have the luxuries. They don't have the bells and whistles. It really is a compelling thing. And then more often than not, when fight night comes around, they usually put forth a better fight than a lot of the men. It really is amazing.
Well, yeah, because you have and often the case, you have the best fighting the best, or the best that you can find fighting the best. And the other thing is that same Heather Hardy or Shelley Vidgen or Sinisa Estrada, when she was coming up in the fights in California, they're also putting all the fannies in the seats. Right? They're the ones selling out a quarter of the stadium. I mean, when Heather Hardy first started to box at Barclays Center in Brooklyn, it's a brand new, beautiful arena, and they started to have boxing. She was on those shows. She'd be on 5 o'clock, 5:30, but she was selling $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 worth of tickets. And she got nothing. She didn't get on TV. They would promise her, oh, we're going to put you on at 7. And then they'd say, no, we're switching you to 5 before people were even let in. So all the people she sold tickets to weren't even there yet. Are you kidding me? This is the life of many women who box. And what I call old gang boxers in my book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, I contrast that kind of life of sort of being an itinerant professional boxer with remarkable skills, remarkable ability, remarkable drive to continue to get into the ring and put on that entertainment for their fans, versus those who came out of the Olympics with really extraordinary accolades and a lot of fights and were treated differently, had different opportunities, came into the pros already earning more than Heather Hardy ever earned, right? Heather Hardy has had 1 6-figure payday in her life. It was this past summer fighting Amanda Serrano.
Yeah.
It was also the only time she ever had camp. She had camp for 1 month where she didn't have to work once.
Yeah. And there was a sisterhood about it, because Amanda Serrano didn't have to give Heather Hardy a world title shot. It was actually a favor for Amanda giving for Heather giving her the shot to win her first of the 426-pound titles that she had.
That is correct. That is correct. That's absolutely the case.
Your first book, A History of Women's Boxing, as Smitty said, it was called The Bible of Women's Boxing by Ring Magazine, because it covered the women's game from the 1700s up until the 2012 Olympics.
Yeah, it's like literally was 300 years. It's unbelievable.
It really is. The amount of research you had to do had to have been staggering, and not just because you had to cover a lot of years, but because you probably had to look long and hard to find just the puzzle pieces. How were you able to put it all together with such relatively little information, especially early on?
Yeah, I have to say I wrote it at a time when many newspapers had been digitized and
Mm,
were therefore easy to research. If I had done it even 10 years earlier, attempted to write it, it would not be this book.
mm,
But because I was able to access digital archives online,
mm.
I was able to find newspaper articles from the 1700s
Wow.
in the United Kingdom on their databases, and was able to therefore use contemporaneous materials to tell my story. And that it was an important key to how I approached it. Look, here we are, here I was at that time in 2012, looking back. I could not wear the lens of a person in 2012 on what the experiences were of women in the 1720s, completely impossible. So I really immersed myself in a larger understanding of the culture in England in the 1720s, um, looking at contemporaneous newspaper articles that talked about women, that talked about athletic women, that talked about women who worked, and to try to create a larger understanding of why women would have been on those stages performing. This was at a time when boxing itself was essentially invented. A man by the name of James Figg used to had was a prize fighter. In those days, prize fighting was with a little short sword. And then at some point, it's like, hey, they started to use the sword in one hand, a fist in the other, and then the sword went away, and they just were doing fisticuffs.
Right.
And James Figg had patronage had royal patronage, and was able to, along with a few other impresarios, started to feature prize fighting alongside things like bear baiting and other really fairly violent sports. But
Wow.
what was really cool is that women performed as prize fighters at the same time that men did, all in the early 1720s. And they would call each other out in newspaper advertisements. I mean, we seem to think that, Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia calling each other out is meaningful. It's been going on for 300 years. Nothing new to see here. So finding those kinds of items and then going through old boxing history books like Boxiana by
Yep.
Pierce Egan, which was written in the 1820s, and finding that he had a page on female boxing was like,
Wow.
oh my God, eureka. It really was a thing. So then I tried to chase it out, tease out each era in terms of where it sat contemporaneously, what was going on with how women were perceived in terms of any kind of athleticism, which in many periods was zero. It was verboten. I mean, as an example, in England in the 1850s, women could be arrested for wearing pants. They
Mm,
were. So,
that's
and then,
incredible.
so in the United States, we kind of say that our first boxing match was in 1876 at a place called Henry Hills, which was a bar and a variety theater on the Bowery. And he did it as sort of a lark, and it got a lot. He was a very great impresario, got a lot of publicity. It was literally in the New York Times and the New York Herald. I found articles about their match in England and in papers in the UK and all around the world. So it
Yeah.
was quite something.
It
But
really
out of
was.
that, he basically built female fisticuffs on the variety theater stage. And the women who boxed on the Bowery at his place then went on variety theater circuits all around the United States. It started to become popular in the UK and in France. So became this minor blip for about 20 years, and even was in 1904, an exhibition bout was held at the St. Louis Exposition, which is where the Olympics were held. Men's boxing also was exhibited at the Olympics they stayed. Women's boxing didn't reappear for another 108 years in 2012.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there were so many, before I go back to you, there's been so many ebbs and flows
Yes.
with women's boxing. It looked at as a sideshow. I remember when I first got into it, Rick Coulis, you probably know the name Rick Coulis, and we had entire fight cards that were all women's cards and had a lot of success with it. Got a television contract, had casinos that really wanted it. And I saw it grow and not become just a sideshow, something that people actually looked forward to. Because the one thing you could guarantee, almost every damn fight was competitive. And one of the things I really liked about the women was the fact that they paid so much attention. All the trainers would say, Smitty, I love working with the gals because they pay attention. When I tell them to keep the elbows in, they actually keep the elbows in. When I tell them to pull back, because they paid attention and they viewed it, the way it should be viewed. But then even with the Rick Coulis and all the shows that I did, with, for example, Cassandra Henderson next to me, and then it went away again, and then it came back, and now it's here to stay now, isn't it? Or is it?
We hope. I mean, it's certainly that's a good question, and it's kind of a complicated answer because, in part, boxing unfortunately has become a niche sport in America. Right,
it's become an event, and it's getting away from being. But don't get me started.
Yeah, I mean, I can go on for that as well. But where women's boxing fares in the midst of all of that is there's no more regular boxing shows. What we have is streaming services with no regularity. DAZN probably has the most boxing at this point, and yet it's the streaming service nobody ever heard of. You got to pay for it on a monthly basis, or you pay for it annually. Most people don't even bother. But it is where all the Golden Boy shows are. Golden Boy puts a lot of women on their cards. It's where Costa Valia goes. I mean, she's headlined on Golden Boy cards shown on DAZN that nobody watches. She was selling out stadiums in Costa Rica, which is why she was so primed to be able to fight in an undisputed battle with Sinisa Estrada. That aside, we do have, we talk about top rank. They have Michaela Mayer and Sinisa Estrada at this point. Bob Arum has been has been promoting women's boxing since the 70s. He'll deny it, but it's the truth, right? He'll say, what women's boxing? As if Michaela Mayer was the first person he ever signed. But he has been involved in women's boxing from the 70s. He then walked away from it. He signed Lucia Riker and promoted her in the late 90s. Then he ditched her in favor of Mia St. John, who's, prettier and was on the cover of Playboy. Don't get me started. But she appeared on all the Oscar de la Hoya cards at the bottom of the card. And then he walked away from boxing women in the sport again until Michaela Mayer, who was an Olympian at the 2016 Olympics, signed with him in 2017. And he promoted her slowly, very slowly, did put her on ESPN, mostly streaming, and then she did begin to appear on the main cards on ESPN channel, although now they barely have any boxing. It's almost all streaming. That's an aside. But during COVID, because there was so little boxing, they actually had Michaela Mayer as a main event. And it really did well because there was so little boxing. So contrary to what we might think, COVID actually was a huge shot in the arm for those few women who were able to box during that period. Because there was so little boxing, those matches had a lot of eyes on them.
So it takes a pandemic to get the women.
Exactly. The platform, but to your point, Smitty, it's best fighting best often, especially at the tops of the cards. So DAZN, for instance, from the UK, had Terry Harper fighting Natasha Jonas in what to me was, I think to a lot of people, but to me especially, was the fight of the summer. It was just this extraordinary battle, back and forth, tremendous heart at super featherweight. Tasha Jonas, again, an Olympian from 2012. She went on to succeed hugely at 154 pounds, had 3 belts in a year, and was the first woman that was recognized by the BBBFC as Fighter of the Year. Parenthetically, Claressa Shields was the fighter recognized as the Foreign Fighter of the Year. So it was never mind the first time you had a woman, you had the women winning 2 categories. That is huge. And as a consequence, the momentum for women's boxing has really shifted to the United Kingdom. And you find American fighters like Claressa Shields going over the UK and signing deals with UK promoters for a couple of fights to be able to get the traction and the money they deserve to fight.
Yeah.
We have a big fight coming up in a couple of weeks between Jessica McCaskill, the former undisputed at 145, who defeated Cecilia Brækhus when on a COVID show, main event. Okay. And outdoors in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Amazing. And I write about that fight and what went into it. But she will fight a Welsh fighter, Lauren Price, who won the gold medal at Tokyo. So you have, this best fighting best. You have what I call the old gang fighters who came up through the professions, really didn't have the opportunity necessarily for amateur fighting, didn't have the care and feeding of being an amateur, where they were being given stipends and places to live and opportunities in that sense. And then when they turned pro, were given better opportunities to kind of start off in the fight game. But Lauren Price will fight Jessica McCaskill. That'll be a really interesting tactical fight.
One of the great, and she's been on our show before, and she's a friend of mine. I think Layla McCarter is just what an interesting story, a hell of a fighter. A lot of people still don't know who she is. I wish she wasn't fighting now because of her age. She still has so much more skill than most of those out there. When I say that name, and she just came to my mind, I know, Lee, you have a few more questions, but when because I want to throw names and have some fun with some of the Layla McCarter, when I say that name to a historian like you.
Well, she's fierce. Unfortunately, Layla is an exceptional boxer. She's had a very long career. It was like 20 plus years at this point in the fight game. She started boxing at a time when you could still see boxing a little bit on American television. ESPN still had fights on a regular basis. Showtime, I think they stopped in around 2002, but ESPN still had a real commitment to it. USA, I think the USA Network used to have boxing shows and they'd have women on there. And she was fighting really great fights. And then she had a real place in Las Vegas. She just owned that town. And as a result, she was successfully able to argue with the Nevada, Boxing Commission to allow 12-round, 3-minute fights for her championships. Mm-hmm. And she famously fought the New York City-based fighter Malissa Hernandez, who was a pistol in the ring. Really exciting, fun fighter in the ring. Very different style than Layla McCarter, and it made for an exciting fight. And they fought 12-3. She also fought Belinda Lara Quentin. So these are
some
really,
of Belinda's fights, yeah.
And some of Belinda's fights were amazing.
Yes, box.
Just watch her fight with Christy Martin, and you kind of shake your head.
I think I did that fight.
How the heck did Christy Martin get the win on that one? But
Layla, if you're watching this, Layla McCarter, make sure you watch "Searching for the Sugar Man," the story of Rodriguez. Because that's who and you'll see why I'm going to make sure that she watches that movie. Somebody that never quite made it the way she should. Hopefully she'll be with me someday at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Lee, I know you got a few more questions, so go ahead, because I got to fire away some stuff later on too before we get Malissa out of here.
Sure. A couple more questions. One,
sure.
You mentioned the 12-by-3 that Layla McCarter engaged in. What do you make of Amanda Serrano's crusade to institute 12 3-minute per rounds for women's world title fights? And what do you make of Mauricio Suleiman's opposition to it?
Well, I do write about that, and it's a complex series of issues. 12-3 is arbitrary. Like 10-2 is arbitrary. And it harkens back to when women's boxing was uh, first allowed to happen, if you will, by the various state boxing boards. Mm-hmm. And, this is when they first started to legalize or license women in the sport in the 1970s and the early 80s. There were a lot of restrictions placed on it. I mean, for instance, in Pennsylvania, there was a brief period of time when women had to wear aluminum bras. 10-2 is the same thing. Unfortunately, we're now living with that legacy of 10-2. So, but what it really means is any state organization, any commission, and any sanctioning body can agree to 12-3 or 10-3. There's nothing that forces a fight to be 10-2. It can be whatever the fighters really want, because the legal limit is 12-3 for the state. So that's why Layla McCarter was successful at arguing for 12-3 in Nevada. The Maurice Suleiman and World Boxing Council has for many years been involved in doing TBI research, basically research into concussions. And their belief is that women, based on very, very limited research that is not necessarily done with boxers, because there's really not studies with many boxing women, the belief that women suffer more from concussions or have greater opportunity to experience brain injuries during boxing or during any kind of event. Now, there is some research for looking at various college sports, soccer, rugby, and so on, team sports primarily, where it's shown that women report concussions more. But we don't know if it's just that they report more than their male counterparts, or they really have more than their male counterparts. There's also no particular research that can speak definitively to the longer term effects of concussions from women versus men. Are there differences due to anatomy? We don't know the answers yet. There is ongoing research. I know the University of Boston is very engaged in TBI research. And as I said, WBC has been sponsoring research, and they've been partnering with UCLA. His belief is, because of women's anatomical structure, they have weaker necks and therefore can have more reverb when they're hit in the head, and therefore can suffer more. And if you add another 16 minutes to a fight, which is 10-2 versus 12-3, this can cause increased risk to the fighters, and therefore he absolutely adamantly refuses to allow anything more than 10-2 for championship fights until he is convinced otherwise.
Where do you stand on that?
My sense is, if you're going to change the product, then make everything 10-2. If you're really that concerned about safety in the ring, and there are many more men that die of boxing and have severe injuries, then make everything 10-2 and have that kind of a product. Yeah. Otherwise, if women want to fight 12-3, then let them fight 12-3. This is a professional game. Now, that's not to say that there aren't serious injuries. There are, but there are other factors. Look at how fighters cut weight. One of the big issues of a brain injury is, are you hydrated or not? If you're hydrated, you have more fluid in your brain. It's more protected when you rattle it like this. Right. If you've been busy cutting weight, and this is true of men and women, and you're wearing sweatsuits while you train and while you spar, and you spar for 12 3-minute rounds, male or female, and you have 3 people coming in, how are you really doing in your last 3 rounds when you're fighting rounds 8, 9, 9, 10, 11, 12? against a fresh fighter and you're in a sweatsuit and you're barely drinking water?
Yeah, I'm one of the
Where's
few
the
that
injury?
says it all the time, you know, because I fought professionally. I still train with a sauna suit, by the way. Brain injuries, brain damage is always going to be part of
Yes.
professional
Yes.
boxing. Lee, you got another question or two before I fire away some stuff?
Well, I do have one final
Okay.
question. We had a State of the Union speech a couple months ago. How would you characterize the state of women's boxing now, and how do you see its future?
Yep, great question.
That is a great question. I think that there's a tremendous improvement in the sport and more opportunity for certain. There are many more very talented fighters who have been coming up through really great amateur organizations such as Beautiful Brawlers out in California. USA Boxing and their local chapters do a great job of encouraging safe boxing and encouraging opportunities for competition. So there are many more women who are able to fight and come into the pros having a really strong pedigree as an amateur, even if they don't necessarily win the top level championships. They are fighting 30, 40, 50 fights as amateurs before they're crossing the threshold into boxing professionally. Earlier in the game, women would start boxing at 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, coming from other sports. Girls are now starting to box at just alongside their male counterparts at 7 and 8, 6, 9, 10. I mean, Sinisa Estrada started boxing at 6 years of age.
Wow.
And came up with a huge, long amateur pedigree, which is why she is where she is. So I think in the long run, there are better equipped and skilled fighters. Where we fall down, where we fail our report card, is in equity in promotions and the ability to have opportunity to reach media and to be on fight cards. I mean, when you still have an organization like PBC that absolutely refuses to put a women's bout on their cards, where are we?
Yeah.
That does not help the cause.
Claressa Shields calls herself the GWOAT. Of course, she has the amateur credentials and the professional credentials to merit that. My eyes don't see it. I go by my eye test. But the one that I have, number one, didn't have the long resume. That would be Lucia Riker. That's from my Smitty eye test. Who would be your top 5? And I know this is tough with women's who are the top 5 for you, for whatever reason? Top 5 female boxers of all time.
Well, yeah, I love Lucia Riker as a fighter. She's beautiful. She's a really wonderful boxer, very talented. I mean, where I cheat the answer on this is that you have women from different eras that were boxing under different conditions.
Correct.
I have to have Christy Martin on my list, not necessarily only always as a pure boxer, but as a figure that has completely revolutionized the opportunity. She created something that didn't exist before her. So I have to have her. Do I love Laila Ali as a fighter? Not necessarily as a pure boxer, again, but as a figure, as someone who still to this day, if you say women's boxing, people say, oh, Laila Ali, Muhammad Ali's daughter. She was important. She was the first person to have pay-per-view. Pure boxing? Oh, I'm going to go with Katie Taylor. My God, that woman just rocks my world when I watch her fight. And grit, determination, opportunity, the levels, the skill set, extraordinary. Claressa Shields, I love her as a boxer. I want to see her be able to fight people who can actually challenge her. Mm. That's part of the problem with Claressa. Who's she going to fight? Maybe Franchon again, because Franchon at least will, they know each other really well. That would be, I hope they do fight again, because that's something worth watching.
Yeah.
I love Amanda Serrano. Again, fighters have strengths, fighters have weaknesses. Her technical work is a work of art. Yeah. She has the most beautiful hook. Oh my God, her body work.
It's really tough. It's a tough question because of, like, for example, Lucia Riker. I think she had under 20 professional fights, for example, and it's so. But here's one that shouldn't be tough for you. The greatest knockout in the history of women's boxing.
Ann Wolfe. Knocking down the tree of Vonda Ward.
Tim
Oh my God.
Burr.
Boom.
And on that note, we'll throw to that.
You see Vonda a little tentative, though. I think she's already tasted a little bit of the power. And she is making, again, a very bad habit, that Rodney Phillips, that she's sticking the chin up. Nice combination by Wolf, backing Vonda up.
It is difficult to ascertain how Vonda has done in her career. I know she's 18-0, 15 knockouts, but how many people were scared of her and did not really fight her?
Oh, big right hand! One punch! That is it! Forget about the count. It is over. Tim Burr. Wow. Unbelievable. Let's hope that Vonda is okay. A jubilant Ann Wolf. That is probably the best knockout punch I've ever seen in female boxing.
Absolutely.
Ever.
Still.
And now we're back. What a brilliant call by that. Who was that guy who came up? That was artistry.
You know him pretty well.
At its finest. So the new book, and we're going to get you on again. We'll get you on The Promise. I love the name of this. The Promise of Women's Boxing, a momentous new era for the sweet science. Before we let you go, tell us what we can look forward to with the new book.
Well, again, it's coming out on June 4th. Anybody that happens to be in Brooklyn, New York on June 15th, you're invited to the book launch at Gleason's Gym, 7 o'clock. I'm in the process of putting together a panel. So we will have actually, as part of the event, a panel discussion with some current and retired female boxers to just talk about the state of the sport and have opportunities for folks who come to the opening to be able to talk to them directly and learn more about what it is to be a female boxer.
That's a perfect week to do it. I will be in Canastota that week hosting the International Boxing Hall of Fame. We hope to see you there in the very near future, and we'll get you back on again. Malissa Smith, who's really doing a great job and has been for quite some time covering the sweet science with the gals of women's boxing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll take a little break, and we'll come back with, I guess it's that time for Smitty Sez, I say, after we do this.
I got two options. Option one, I can accept defeat. Option two, I can get up. I can get tougher. I can get faster. I can get stronger. And then I go get mine. I made my choice. Have you made yours?
Back on In This Corner, the podcast. Again, next week, we will be talking to Tommy Yankello and hopefully Regis Prograis, the former 140-pound champion, who's been inside the squared circle with Devin Haney in his last fight. We'll break that fight down. Haney and Ryan Garcia. That'll be next week, and that's a segue into Smitty Sez.
Yeah, but before we go into Smitty Sez, I want to cover a couple of fights that I neglected to mention in the preview section. ESPN's going to have a broadcast, and in the main event, heavyweight Jared Anderson, who has been described as the next big thing in American heavyweight boxing. He's going to be returning to the ring after
he's been the big thing with the police lately, hasn't he? But that's another story.
Yeah, he has. There's been three separate incidents, but he returns to the ring against Rihad Murhi of Belgium. I expect that Anderson is going to do his thing and score another knockout. And then in the on the broadcast as well, another heavyweight fight, Efe Ajagba versus Guido Vianello. And I expect Efe Ajagba to win that as well. He's more seasoned, fought better opponents at higher levels. I think that he's going to win that one. But we now transition to Smitty Sez. And the first story that I'm going to bring to you involves Katie Taylor. She's the undisputed champion at 140 pounds, and she has apparently turned down a rubber match with Chantelle Cameron in favor of a rematch against Amanda Serrano in early June at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Cameron is very angry about this because she felt, as I do, she won the second fight and deserves the third fight to settle the score. Does Cameron have a beef? And what does Smitty Sez about the rematch with Serrano?
Yeah, I agree. Cameron has a legitimate, beef there. And Serrano and Taylor, too, will pale in comparison. It'll probably, I mean, it'll be like an Ali Frazier, too. It won't be like the Thrill in Manila. Um, both have declined. Katie's on the other side. Serrano's on the other side. It'll still be good because they're both on the other side. But yeah, I think, I would like, I'm not, I don't know. I think if they were going to have a rematch, it should have already taken place, but it'll be a good one again because both gals are on that other side, but they're both on the other side. So it could make for a good matchup.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And moving on to the second subject, during a recent interview, Paulie Malignaggi had some very choice words regarding Ryan Garcia, saying that the idiocracy that has made him popular on social media has resulted in his being given an undeserved title shot against Devin Haney. He also took a shot at Garcia's fan base, saying the following, quote, "He's popular and generates money. The fact is you don't have to promote the fight that much because he's got an idiot fan base that'll probably not watch it anyway because they're not boxing fans. It just shows you the generation he's in and why the guy is so popular," end quote. Now, this is the Smitty Says segment. What does Smitty say about
Smitty
Paulie's
says that he already said, I said that months ago, didn't I? I mean, I've already said that. And I like Paulie, and he's absolutely right on that. All kidding aside, all joking aside, all sarcasm aside, something's wrong with Ryan Garcia. Today they had his media workout, and he was talking about Diddy, and he's completely out there. If I were, his father, I would be really concerned about my son. Same goes, I guess, for his mother and for his trainer. But it's all about, I guess, dollars and cents, because he's certainly lost any sense that he has up there, if he ever had any. I don't know what's wrong with the young man. He has some talent, some skills. It's funny because I think if he had really focused on just boxing, I actually think he could have some moments and some opportunities with Haney, but I just don't know what to say, and I don't want to give him any more airtime. It's just all ludicrousy, and but it's dangerous when you do it in this sport of boxing. So I guess we'll talk a lot more about that next week.
Yeah. And, speaking of the effects of social media, Claressa Shields, who we talked about with Malissa, temporarily left her workstation while doing commentary for DAZN to confront undisputed 130-pound champion and longtime social media antagonist Alycia Baumgardner. Apparently, Shields has been pushing for a fight against Baumgardner, believe it or not. And Baumgardner hasn't fought since last July. And her ABC suspension for a failed doping test was lifted last month, so she's free to fight again. What are your thoughts about Shields' professionalism as a broadcaster, leaving her station the way that she did? And what are your thoughts about any possible fight between Claressa Shields and Alycia Baumgardner?
Yeah, I'll cover the fight first. I did their fight already. It was called Layla Ali versus Christy Martin.
Yeah.
She's too damn big for Baumgardner. She's in my opinion, way too big.
Yeah.
So there's the issue there. And as far as the broadcast, I because something that I do, you and I have had a lot of these discussions. I just wish these people that, ex-fighters or current fighters, somebody would help them with their broadcasting and their commentary skills. She's thrown on there. I guarantee you nobody's helping her, with maybe with preparation, but after you do the fight, sitting down with her and talking about, this is what you should really tell the audience this is what you should really be working on, explaining what fighter A, fighter B should do, what they shouldn't be doing, how this relates to your career styles, and then breaking down the fight, the refereeing, the judging, what should be looked for, the X's and the O's. She was lost. You remember and there was a Smith character, and remember the show Lost in Space? I'm really dating myself, but
Smith,
she was like, she was, I think it was a line was never fear Smith is here or something like that, but she was completely lost in space, and it's not her fault. It's not her fault. She is not prepared. By the way, there's a lot of fighters male fighters that are calling fights on a regular basis that are not necessarily ill prepared, because they have people like you that help them prepare with all their notes and everything. But in terms of getting better and improving, my friend, the late Fred Hickman, did something where he was helping ex-athletes who wanted to become broadcasters and helping those that were doing it become better. Maybe there's a place for that in boxing and I will not mention names because I know them all and they all know me. But all of them need to improve, and as we all do, but they need somebody to help them. It's just, and I think it would make the game so much better, the sport so much better, I should say, because the fans, this is where they get their acumen from the broadcasters, and they bring an ex-fighter on or a current fighter in the case of Shields to educate the fans. And if they don't know how to properly educate, I mean, it's just like a teacher. A teacher has to be trained to be a teacher or to become a professor. So it's a sensitive subject with me. So I'm not gonna pick on Claressa because she was ill prepared and she doesn't know what she knows the sport, but she doesn't know how to articulate it in a way that the fans can gain from her great knowledge. And I think so. Hopefully somebody can help her with that if she wants to continue to do it. That's my Smitty Sez on that. And on that note, we're already in overtime here. Next week on the program, Tommy Yankello and hopefully Regis Prograis will be here to break down Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia for their fight in New York. Where's it at? In Brooklyn, right? I guess it's in Brooklyn. You can see how much
Barclays.
You can see how much attention I'm paying to it. I do like Devin Haney, and but again, we'll have that next week. I do want to thank Malissa Smith. Great job she did, and she's got the books out and the new book coming out. So we want to thank her for joining us, and as always, thank you, Lee Groves. Until next week, so long, everybody.